How you going there, peeps? Phil here from MTG Kiwi Philosophy here again, bringing you yet another deck tech. This time, this is my mono black zombies. Alright, let's kick into it. First of all, let's look at the curve. In our 1-drop slot, we've got 4 creatures. In our 2-drop slot, we've got 4 creatures and 4 spells. In our 3-drop slot, we've got 12 creatures and 3 spells. In our 4 drops, we have 4 spells. In our 5 drops, we have 3 spells. And of course, in our 6 drops, we have 2 spells. Alright, well, let's get into it. We don't exactly have a build around, so we're just going to go from our high end to our low end and talk about our synergies. Alright, well, let's get into it. And of course, our first 1-drop, we're going with 4 copies of Stitch's Supplier. Now, the Stitch's Supplier is a fantastic card. Dumping 3 cards into our graveyard when it ETBs is fantastic. And of course, it is only a 1/1, but it is a zombie, so we're going to get something out of this. And our 2-drop, we're going with 4 copies of Graveyard Marshal. The Graveyard Marshal is fantastic. Once again, it's a zombie, but it's 3/2, so it's got a decent attack. Not super in defense, but it's a good power for the cost. And it's got a good ability as well, being able to pay 3 and exile a creature card from our graveyard to create a black zombie is not terrible either. And of course, to make all of our zombies a little bit more powerful and scary, we're going with 4 copies of Death Baron. Now, Death Baron's great. It's 2/2, but skeletons and zombies we control get +1 and have Death Touch. So that's really good, being able to have that ability to pump our zombies, but also make them a little bit more scary when we attack, because at the end of the day, we really want to be aggressive with this deck and just get in. Alright, well, let's move on to our next card. 4 copies of Phylactery Lich. This 3-drop 5/5 indestructible zombie is pretty good. Yeah, we have to put a counter onto an artifact we control, and of course, if the artifact's removed, we have to remove the Lich. However, we've got a solution for this problem, but we'll get to that soon. But let's get into the last creature in this deck. Okay, now the last creature is not a zombie, but it works perfectly with the deck, and that is 4 copies of Dreadshade. Now, Dreadshade's fantastic. Having a 3/3 that can be pumped for each swamp we have is really fantastic. And of course, we're going to be able to have a little bit of help in the deck to make sure this gets really huge, and also ways to reoccur it as well. Alright, so those are all of our creatures that we've got in the deck, and now we're going to move into our spells and our synergies. Okay, let's get into our first spell, and the first spell we're going to go from our low end, and that is 4 copies of Abnormal Endurance. Abnormal Endurance is fantastic. We're going to be able to use our creatures really well. So yeah, if we can protect our Death Baron, that'll be fantastic. If we can bounce some of our other cards and make sure that we can keep them alive, it's a good way to also protect the Phylactery Lich as well before we get the combination online. And of course, it's also just good for a bit of extra damage and board presence. Alright, well, let's move on to the next card. 3 copies of Crucible of the World. It's a 3-drop artifact that's going to allow us to get those lands from our graveyard. So whenever we use the Stitch's Supplier and we mill some of our land into our graveyard, and if we get a little bit land screwed, it means that we're going to be able to have something that's going to help us reoccur some of that mana back into our pool, and also it's going to help us later on when we need mana to sink into cards. Alright, let's move on to the next card, and the next card is 4 copies of Phyrexian Scriptures. Having 4 copies of Phyrexian Scriptures is really awesome if we have a Phylactery Lich in play. Being able to put the +1 counter on a Lich and make it an artifact and giving it +1 means that we can then play another one on top of that to give that a Phylactery counter, and being indestructible itself, it means it's going to really hold its own a little bit more. Alright, let's move on to the next card, and we're going to go with 3 copies of Rise from the Grave. Now, I love Rise from the Grave. Being able to put a creature card from our graveyard straight onto the battlefield and then making it a zombie, perfect. So there's the solution for our Shade. We can get our Shade into play, it's pumpable, it's Death Touch if we have a Baron in play, and you know, that's pretty sweet. Having recursion from our graveyard is very typical of a zombie deck. Alright, well, let's move on to the last card, and that is 2 copies of the Immortal Sun. This brutal 6-drop artifact, fantastic. Planeswalkers can't use their activation abilities, so we're shutting down that from our opponents. At the beginning of our draw step, we get an additional card. Our spells cost 1 less to cast, and our creatures get +1/+1. So that's pretty damn good. And of course, it's another target for the Phylactery Lich, being able to put a counter on this and then keep it indestructible as well. Alright, well, that's the main deck. Let's move into our lands and our sideboard. Now, in our lands, we're going to go with something that's very typical of mono black decks and standard. And of course, that is 4 copies Cabal Stronghold. having a card that we can tap for 1 colorless or tap 3 and add a black mana for each swamp we control is fantastic. This is going to be really good for our Shade. And of course, we also want to go with 4 copies of Memorial to Folly because we want to have some recursion from the graveyard. Alright? And of course, nothing wrong with having 16 swamps as well, just to round it off and make sure we get those even numbers. Okay, let's get into our sideboard. 2 copies of Arguel's Bloodfast, 2 copies of Vona's Hunger, and 4 copies of Vraska's Contempt. Okay, so Arguel's Bloodfast is fantastic. Of course, being able to pay a little bit of life to get that extra card draw early on is really fantastic. And of course, if we are able to flip it, then of course we are able to sacrifice cards like our Shade once they've been pumped and gain a ridiculous amount of life. If we can get that off, that's really fantastic. And Vona's Hunger is always a good late play. Being able to have something that your opponent has to sacrifice half of their creatures rounded up if we've got the City's Blessing. Vraska's Contempt, always just a value card and fantastic for mono black. Being able to exile creatures and planeswalkers with a little bit of life gain. Alright, moving on to the last 2 cards in our deck. And the first card is 3 copies of Eldest Reborn and 3 copies of Josu Vest Lich Knight. Now the Eldest Reborn is once again a value card, so we're really going for value. It is a little bit costly at 5, but having 3 triggers that can really help us out is awesome. And Josu Vest is such a good value card as well, especially late game. You know, late game, being able to kick this bad boy and put that many zombies into play. You know, zombie knights of menace for that matter. And of course, being able to do that is really awesome. And Josu's value itself being a 5/4 for 4 with menace, it's such a good card. And zombies, here they come. Of course, with the Death Baron in play, all those zombie knights once again will become 3, possibly even more depending on the amount of barons we have in play. But you know, that's what's really great about Josu, being able to use him, and we should have no problem really being able to kick him if we've got him late game and we've got at least 1 or 2 of the Cabal Strongholds in play. Alright, well that's it for the deck. I hope you like it. I guess there is an argument for being able to use Cast Down in the deck too. I did think about that, so if you wanted to stick that in the sideboard, by all means do it. And if you've got something you'd like to change or think you've got something that could make the deck better, yeah, by all means, leave a comment. I'm Phil. This is MTG Kiwi Philosophy. I'll catch you on the flip side. Ciao.